Sometimes the most obscure, totally bizarre legal cases are the ones that teach us the most profound lessons about how our justice system really works. And this is definitely one of those cases. It's a story about a win that felt more like a loss, a husband with two completely different stories, and a fundamental rule that pretty much holds the entire legal process together. So let's break down exactly what happened. To really get our heads around this, we have to start with the central puzzle, because it's a real head-scratcher. Just imagine this for a second. You're in court, and the judge dismisses the case that was filed against you. You won, right? Simple. But what if the judge's reasoning is so damaging to your legal status that you have no other choice but to appeal your own victory? That is the bizarre riddle we're going to unpack.
All right, let's set the scene. We're looking at a 2008 case from the Gauhati High Court in Assam, India. The whole dispute is between a husband, Dina Nath Talukdar, and his wife, Putuli Das. And what started as what looked like a pretty straightforward divorce suit, well, it spiraled into a total procedural nightmare that ended up exposing a critical flaw in the original trial.
So here's the basic setup. The husband, Dina Nath, he sues his wife, Putuli Das, for divorce. His official reason? He accuses her of adultery. Okay, simple enough. After hearing the case, the trial court judge actually dismisses the husband's suit. So on paper, this looks like a clear win for the wife. But that little catch, the reason for the dismissal, that's what turns this whole thing on its head. And this is where things just get truly weird. The judge dismissed the case, but the logic behind that dismissal was so damaging to Putuli Das's legal status as a married woman that she was left with no other option. She had to appeal the very judgment that was technically in her favor. I mean, what on earth could a judge have said to cause an outcome that bizarre? Well, it turns out the source of all this legal chaos was the husband himself. The guy just could not keep his story straight. In fact, he told the court two completely different, totally contradictory stories about his own marriage. If you look at the timeline, it reveals a deeply troubled marriage from the get-go. It starts with Dina Nath marrying Putuli Das, but just 3 months later, he moves a second woman and her children into their home. The conflict, as you can imagine, just escalates with accusations of adultery, and it all ends up with a divorce filing. This messy history is really the backdrop for the real problem. The husband couldn't decide which story he wanted to tell the court. Okay, now here is the moment where the husband's case completely falls apart. In his official written court filing, what lawyers called the pleading, he stated that Putuli Das was his first wife. He claimed that because she couldn't have children, she actually consented to his second marriage. But then, when he gets up on the witness stand, he tells a totally different story. He testifies that actually Devajani was his first wife, and he married Putuli Das second while his first marriage was still legally valid. Now, this wasn't some minor slip-up. It was a complete 180 that changed the entire legal nature of his case. So what does a court even do with this kind of chaos when someone just completely flips their own story? Well, it turns out the system has a really powerful, non-negotiable rule designed for exactly this kind of mess. You just can't change your story halfway through the game. The critical concept here is something called pleadings. Now, these aren't just casual notes. Pleadings are the formal, official, written documents you file at the very start of a lawsuit. You can think of them as the constitution for your case. They lay out your story, your claims, and they form the unchangeable foundation that everything else has to be built on. Here's a really simple way to think about it. A pleading is like the official game plan you submit to the league before a big match. If your plan says you're playing football, you can't show up on game day, start shooting hoops, and then expect the referee to judge you based on the rules of basketball. The game plan you filed is the game you have to play. Period. And this is not some new idea. This is a bedrock rule that goes back decades. As a high court famously stated way back in 1930, no amount of evidence can be looked into upon the plea which is not pleaded. In other words, if you bring in a mountain of evidence for a story you never officially told the court in your written pleadings, that evidence is legally worthless. It might as well not even exist. So when this tangled case finally arrived at the Gauhati High Court, the judges weren't really interested in the personal drama of who married whom first. Their job was to hit the reset button and enforce the fundamental rules of the legal game. And it's really important to understand what the High Court didn't do. They didn't rule on whether the husband's first story or his second story was true. They didn't make a declaration about whether Putuli Das was wife number 1 or wife number 2. Their decision was purely about the legal process. The first judge had broken a fundamental rule, and that error just had to be corrected. The High Court's logic was methodical, step by step. First, they said the trial judge made a huge error by even considering evidence for the husband's second story, because it was never in the official pleading. Second, because of that mistake, the judge completely failed to even discuss the actual claim from the pleading, which was adultery. And third, these errors were so foundational that the High Court remanded the case. That's just legal speak for sending it back to the lower court with clear instructions. Do it over, but this time do it right and base your decision only on the original written story. And as a final measure, the High Court ordered the husband to pay his wife 2,000 rupees for her legal costs. Now, it's not a huge amount of money, but it's a symbolic penalty for causing all of this procedural chaos and forcing her to appeal a case she had supposedly already won. Okay, so it's a weird case from over a decade ago. Why should we even care? Well, because this bizarre little dispute teaches us some huge universal lessons about what justice and fairness really mean inside a courtroom. And this gets right to the heart of the legal confusion. The husband filed for a divorce. A divorce is a legal action to end a marriage that was considered valid. But his evidence on the witness stand, that he was already married when he wed Putuli Das, that didn't support a divorce at all. It pointed toward nullity, which is a declaration that a marriage was never legal to begin with. These are two completely different legal concepts, and you just can't sue for one and then try to prove the other. So what are the big lessons here? First, the sanctity of pleadings. Your official written story is the absolute, unchangeable foundation of your case. Second, this rule ensures fairness. It protects people from getting ambushed in court by a brand new story they have no way to prepare for. Third, it forces legal clarity. A case for divorce is not a case for nullity, and the court needs to know which one you're arguing. And finally, maybe most importantly, this case proves that process matters. Following the rules of the game isn't just about technicalities, it's absolutely essential for achieving real substantive justice. And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. Our legal system is supposed to be a machine designed to find the truth. But as this case shows so clearly, sometimes the rules of the game, the process that's designed to ensure fairness for everyone, that has to be protected above all else. Which raises a fascinating question. In a system that's built to find truth, when does sticking to the rules become even more important than the truth of any one person's story? That's definitely something worth thinking about.